Silent. Don't you know my name? I'm Leah.
This is Michaela.
We have an exciting episode with Geoff Micks. Geoff is the head of content and research for executive platforms, where he has planned and contributed to over 100 industry events. He also hosts the Blueprint podcast series and is an accomplished author of historical fiction. Today, we'll explore the theme I am a number and delve into how numbers play a crucial role in Jeff's professional and creative life. Beyond his professional career, he is an author of historical fiction novels and lives in Toronto with his wife Kelly and their dog Cora. Welcome to the show. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, and thank you for having me. My name is Geoff Micks. I'm head of content and research with an industry events company called Executive Platforms. In my free time, I also write historical fiction. I've finished 5 novels. I'm working on my 6th right now.
Great. And where can our listeners find you online?
So the podcast of my company is, sorry, do we edit this? Can I redo that piece? Is that all right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, I wasn't sure if this is strictly organic or if I'm allowed to repeat myself. Sorry, I stumbled when I said blog. I should have said podcast.
Oh, no problem. I will
Okay, so-
repeat and edit this part.
Perfect. And I apologize. I should have asked that ahead of time. So my podcast, we can sort of start and stop and take out the bad bits. And then it occurred to me, I don't know if I'm allowed to do that here. So, okay, please continue.
So let's dive into our conversation with Geoff Micks. Please introduce yourself and tell us where our listeners can find you online.
Well, thank you so much, Leah. And first of all, I really appreciate being on your show. My name is Geoff Micks. I'm head of content and research for an industry events company called Executive Platforms. I host that company's business podcast. So if you, wherever anyone finds their podcast, if you put in the Blueprint or Executive Platforms, it should come right up. I also write historical fiction as a hobby. So I have 5 novels available on Amazon. Anyone who puts in Geoff Micks, I should come right up.
Great. So let's talk about your career beginnings before we dive into the theme. You transitioned from print media to the industry events business in 2010.
Yes.
Can you share what motivated you this change and how your early career influenced your approach to conference production?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for the question. So I went to school for journalism, and I like to make the joke maybe I was born in the wrong generation. I think if I'd been in my parents' generation, I would have had a wonderful career in newspapers. But I am a millennial, and the newspaper industry there you go. The newspaper industry is not doing so well and hasn't been doing well for a long time. I did work in community newspapers for the first 4 years of my working life out of university. And at the time, the thinking was, our teachers all told us, go out and work at a small newspaper somewhere, earn your stripes, and then, you can move to a big city and work for a bigger paper. I actually had a real adventure. My first year out of school, I worked for a newspaper in the heart of Mennonite country. So it was actually one of the newspapers in the world that is still doing really well because, of course, Mennonites reject modern technology. They loved that community newspaper. It was absolutely fascinating for them. I have a lot of wonderful stories and experiences from that time. And then that job got me a job in a larger center working for those community newspapers. And, I was a young, ambitious person, and I volunteered for a lot of things, and I did a lot of extra work, and they kept rewarding me with additional training and encouragement, but never any more money. And after about 4 years, I did get to the point of saying, okay, well, I'm in my mid-20s now, and I do start need to making decisions about like how am I going to earn a living that is going to be a career path that fosters me. And they basically admitted I had to wait for everyone ahead of me to retire. And that is a terrible thing to say to a 24, 25, 26-year-old, because the people who wanted to retire had already retired. So the people who loved their work, I'm not going to ask them to leave. I'm not going to try to push anybody out. And of course, some of them are still working in that industry today. So I did make a difficult decision. Okay, if I'm going to leave newspapers, which was work that I really enjoyed, where do I want to go that is going to use some of the same skill sets? And also, I enjoy people's stories, much like your podcast. I enjoy meeting people and asking them what they do, and getting to understand them a little better. What other work out there uses some of those skill sets and gives me some of those experiences? And at the time, I don't know if it still exists, but there used to be job boards specifically for journalists. And a lot of them were like, oh, this newspaper is hiring, this radio station is hiring. But of course, as journalism became the industry that it's becoming, those job boards became rather barren. But industry conference production started advertising on these job boards saying, we want journalists to develop agendas for us. So you would be given a topic. So let's say mining in British Columbia, Canada. Okay, I don't know anything about that. But, if I was a journalism who'd been assigned a business story, I wouldn't necessarily know anything about it either. So what do? You call around, you have conversations with people who work in that space. But instead of it going into a newspaper, I would say, okay, well, my company is interested in doing a conference in British Columbia on the mining sector. What should be the topic of conversation? Like if we've got a couple of days of a conference room stage, who should be on the stage? What should they be talking about? Who should be in the audience? Why do people care? And after you have 40 or 50 of those conversations, people start overlapping their answers. And then you write an agenda, you call some of those people back, or you call the people that they referred, hey, I'm putting together this mining conference in British Columbia. Everybody tells me, you do amazing work on tailings ponds, or you do amazing work on underground ventilation, or, you're the best safety person to speak to, and we need a safety speaker on this conference. And so once you've got 20 or 30 speakers and they've all been sort of assigned, this is your 40 minutes to talk about this, this is your hour to talk about that, hey, we're doing a panel, can you be on this panel? Then I would turn and train a bunch of salespeople why anybody would care. And those salespeople would then reach out to people in British Columbia's mining community and say, hey, we're putting on a conference. And that was the first one. And I've now done that more than 100 times. I also eventually, I left the first company I worked at. I went to another one that did mostly American and European companies. I went back to the Canadian one for a while. I went to another one. My current employer, I've been with them coming up on 9 years. And they actually didn't want a conference producer. They wanted a head of content and research. And at one point, I also had a marketing hat on. But to be honest, I'm less interested in marketing and more interested in content, in conversations like this one. So, for the last 9 years, I've been having conversations with senior executives from Fortune 1000 companies, and it tends to be built around a discipline, right? So it's a manufacturing or supply chain, HR, finance, maybe it's food safety, whatever it is. It's a whole bunch of executives who all have the same thing in common. But, if they're working their day-to-day life, they're in their office, and every good idea they have to come up with themselves. Well, if you were put in a space for a couple of days with people from all over the continent who do your job, what would you want to talk about? Behind closed doors at your seniority level. So it's not, hey, you're worried a junior person is going to hear you admit you don't know something. And it's not a super senior person saying, what, you don't know that? Like, talk to your peers. What is the thing that you're working on that you have questions about? And I often make the joke, we put together an agenda, we put together speaker faculty, we tell people what's going to happen. But the real value of going is you're going to go for a cup of coffee and you're going to bump into somebody you wouldn't have met any other way. And you're going to say, oh, my company's trying to do X. And that person says, oh, we tried that a couple of years ago. Have you tried Y? And that one conversation made the whole thing worth doing. So I really enjoy my work. And in the last couple of years, they've had me launch a podcast about it. We're up to 2 episodes a week now,
nice.
where we talk about, what's going on in these different industry spaces, things that we wouldn't put on a conference stage. And yeah, it's been incredibly rewarding. And I always come back with cool stories to share with people.
Amazing. First of all, I'm always glad to have fellow podcasters in this corner. And I'm also an enthusiast of newspaper, but I was just the newspaper reader. I loved to read newspaper while having a breakfast. It was the best part of the day. Unfortunately, like you said, this industry is dead. we can't deny. It's that, especially with the new technologies, the social media. It's not the same experience we had while reading newspapers. I agree with you. So the next question is has everything to do about it. What inspires you to keep doing what you are doing?
Well, why don't I do one example that I always bring up when people say, what's the best thing you ever heard from a stage? So I do a
Mhm,
biopharmaceutical conference. We've been doing it for 9 years. And I'm the first person to say, I am not an expert at what these experts talk about. Like they have an
mhm,
education and a life experience and a working experience that is just, I would have to live their life to know everything that they're doing. But about 8 years ago, a man got on the stage and, I'm in the back of the room and he's talking to a couple hundred biopharmaceutical manufacturing executives at their
mhm,
level who are talking about something very intricate and detailed. But he said something about type 2 diabetes. And he said, I can get this to work in the lab right now. And I've got the next 5 or 6 years to figure out how to make it commercially work at the price point that socialized medicine all over the world can do it, because I didn't get into this industry to cure billionaires, but this works. And my father has type 2 diabetes and he, did an insulin
mhm,
injection every day. And after this
mhm,
conference, I called him and I said, would you like just take care of yourself for 5 or 6 years? Because I heard something on a stage today and I don't know exactly what I heard, but I don't think you're going to need insulin anymore. And today he doesn't. He when he was diagnosed with diabetes, he was told it was like climbing a staircase, where every time you go up a step, you'll never go down a step. So once he was on
mhm.
insulin, he was never supposed to come off insulin. My father doesn't take an insulin injection anymore, and I wonder if
Oh,
that man on that stage had something to do with whatever has changed in my father's pharmacological situation. They've given him some new drugs and now his diabetes is where it was when he was 30 years old instead of 40 years old. Well, he's in his 70s now, and I didn't come up with that cure and I didn't help that guy commercialize his thing, but I organized the conference where all of these people could get together and talk about their challenges and their opportunities with the confidence that they were speaking to the right people and that they could ask questions in a safe and productive way. And if that person went to my conference and then went back to his office and solved a problem, well, my contribution to that was that I made that conversation happen in a way he couldn't have done that for himself. And I like to think I've done that with all of my conferences: food safety conferences, HR conferences, supply chain conferences. I've done pipeline safety conferences. Is there a chance that there's a pipeline somewhere that didn't leak because I put a bunch of safety technicians together and they shared best practices? I don't know what impact my work has had in the world, but I like to think every time I do something, conversations happened that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And that's what I put into the world. I feel pretty good about it.
yeah. Oh, I think that's a great job, especially for people who are not so good at holding conferences, speaking in public. I myself, I every 2 weeks I practice public speaking with a group of people. So when we are introvert or socially awkward, it's my case. It's really important to practice, to train, and to relax. It's not something so weird to present ourselves to a public. And besides, I studied theater and singing, so stage performances are stressful for introverts, and having someone to encourage you doing something there with confidence is amazing, and that's all I can say.
Well, I want to compliment you then for hosting a podcast for 9 years. I mean, that's certainly putting yourself out there. And, we didn't know each other a week ago. So it's so interesting that you're having conversations with strangers all over the world about, what they do and what's creative. And I think I wouldn't have guessed you're an introvert. That's a wonderful hobby or work project that you've set for yourself. Congratulations.
Oh, thanks. It started as a hobby, a catharsis, I always say to people, and now it's a serious business because at back that moment I was supposed to be a lawyer, and now I'm a graphic designer and illustrator.
And what a wonderful creative field to be in, and it sounds like you're very happy at it.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So today's theme is I am a number, and the first question has to do about the role of numbers in event planning. We know we don't need to focus only on the numbers, but content is really important. Uh, well, how do you utilize data and metrics to ensure each event meets its objectives, or you don't focus on numbers and data
So
before?
I think it's a great question. I think we're always trying to strike that balance, right? Because in business, numbers are so important. Data is so
Yeah.
important. You want to understand the market that you're serving, the people that are going to be coming to the event, but you also always want to remember people are individuals. They have individual wants and needs. There might be groups of people who have things in common, but you don't want to lose sight of the individual when you're saying, okay, what is an effective event? So we found some events are great with two streams of parallel content where we can have maybe let's talk about food safety. We can have quality people in one stream of content and compliance people in a different stream of content, because what they want to talk about is related, but realistically, the compliance people are concerned with regulatory issues, what is changing in the regulatory landscape. If you put that in front of the safety and quality people, they say, yeah, we know, but we've got a guy for that. And if you had the food safety and quality people talking about, okay, we're changing the way we're training people, or this new technology is coming on the market that is letting us sample this in a different way, quality and compliance people are going to say, yeah, but how does that impact my form? So having studied these two groups that are overlapping and interconnected, we said, well, what are the numbers? There's enough of a 50-50 divide here. Let's do two streams of content running concurrently. They can go to the same keynotes, they can go to the same panel discussions, but from time to time, we have two different rooms running at the same time. Food safety people go in one, food compliance people go in the other. They can meet up later. So that's an idea where like an insight through data has let us serve the people better. We also have people fill out extensive like questionnaires before they come to an event. As an example, what are some of the key business challenges or opportunities you're working on in the next 12 months? And then we can take that data and approach service and solution providers relevant to the industry. And it's not a scattergun approach of, boy, who sells things to businesses in this space. We can actually say, 25% of the people who are coming to our audience are actually looking for an AI solution right now. You're working in that space. Would you be interested in coming out and showing what you're doing to the 25% who said, yes, we can even facilitate it ahead of time. We can give you their names and contact information. We can set aside a block of time so that the two of you can sit down. What are you trying to do in AI? We're doing this. Is that a good match? Before anyone has ever left their office, they know they're going to have a conversation about AI, which they told us matters to them. And we found service and solution providers working in that space who are relevant. They can have that conversation on site, and it's guaranteed the value beforehand. And then we do, again, surveys after the thing. Where did you find value? Where did you not find value? What is the thing that would make you want to come back next year? What is the thing that we're not doing in a different space? The number of people. So, for instance, we have a long-running and successful food safety and quality show, and we have never done a food manufacturing show because we have a general manufacturing show. And the general manufacturing people have said, food is its own subset of the business, and their challenges and opportunities need to be discussed in amongst themselves. It's not, the aerospace people and the food people don't have enough overlap, as one example. But we haven't got a critical mass data-wise of attendees in the manufacturing space to do their own thing. Meanwhile, we've got a food safety and quality show. They don't necessarily manufacture the stuff. They're the people who are making sure it's safe and good for us to eat and is compliant with regulatory requirements and what have you. They all know the food manufacturing people. So we've triangulated through these post-event surveys. If we did a food manufacturing show, would you pass this along to the person in your space who's your VP of operations, your VP of manufacturing, your VP of supply chain? And enough of them have now said, yes, we're launching that show for the first time in October. So data does inform what we do, but we always have to think about the people and what it's actually going to do for them.
Oh, that's wonderful. I agree with you. We must care about numbers when we join the entrepreneurial game. uh, And in my case, it's really hard as a solo creator to, well, balance quality and quantity. But I try. I swear I try. Well, uh, let's talk about challenges and successes. What are some of the biggest challenges you faced in your career? And how did data metrics help you overcome them? And can you share a success story?
So when you said what is the biggest challenge, my first thought was monetizing what I do. I think as a
Oh,
creative person, you
yeah,
can
it's
probably
a
identify I
you're
can
right.
make something that is interesting. Someone needs to attach a dollar value to it and sell it, and someone needs to buy it. And I am very fortunate in my career, especially since moving into industry conference production. It attracts very talented salespeople. Business development is a key aspect of most business conferences. So, like, there's already a thriving business development community in this space, and people who attend conferences say, why am I, forgive me, selling this widget or this piece of software? These guys are selling the entire event. How do I get into that? And so one of the things that a creative person does have to do when they're engaging with a salesperson, though, is understand that person thinks in dollars and cents, is motivated by their own goals, largely that are this is the number that I want to hit for myself this month or this year. They are powerfully motivated by markers of success and key performance indicators and benchmarks. So, within my experience as a creative person, it's not enough to put something out there in the world. It needs to be put something out there in the world that is going to excite business people, salespeople, because that's how you take a creative endeavor and actually turn it into a product that generates an income that, powers a company. I'm making a product for them to sell. I am not making a product because I think it's neat. So that is one of the things when you're a young person, you're just like, but I'm so good at making whatever. But does somebody want it? And it's not enough to say, well, somebody somewhere wants it. There needs to be that interlocutor, the salesperson who puts it in front of the relevant audience and says, not only are you interested in this, you're interested enough in it to support the creation of it, and with a little bit extra, because we all need to pay our salaries and turn a profit margin so that we can reinvest in the business, so we can grow, so we can do more of these. So that is one of the things that I think most people who are creative in their working lives need to wrap their heads around. I need to build a product for the salespeople. So when you talk about a challenge or something in my working life, and now I
Mhm.
want to connect it to this, where I have struggled to build a product. Let me think. Um, the first time I built a pharmaceutical event, I did feel overwhelmed because it is such a complicated space, and I do not
Yeah.
have a biological background. I do not have a medical background. I didn't feel I had the tools to build a product that that audience would care about. And one of the things that I discovered when I started doing my research calls is everybody is a human being. Nobody expects the person that they're talking to for the first time to be an expert, but they do want to have a grounding that they're not dealing with someone totally out of left field. It wasn't my first conference. It wasn't my first phone call. I just didn't know how to talk to them about pharmaceuticals. So at the time, I'd done a lot of mining and oil and gas and pipeline conferences. That was the job I'd had before I'd moved over into this other conference. And so I would say, I have to apologize. They brought me in to fix this pharmaceutical event that last year didn't do very well. I'm actually the mining guy. They brought me in because I'm very good at what I used to do, and they headhunted me from my last company. And this is my first conversation about pharmaceutical manufacturing. I'm guessing it's different than mining. You went to last year's conference. Why don't you walk me through what went wrong so that I can start making a list of what to fix? And most people, when you start from a position of help me on an individual level, I'm not trying to pull one over on you. This is my honest situation. They will laugh and they will help you. Most people, if they have the time and want you to do well, have that human connection and say, okay, he's the mining guy. Here's what actually happened. Here's what you need to do for the pharmaceutical space. The next time you're on this call, ask this question and this question and this question. So starting from admitting I didn't know what I was doing, have a few honest conversations, and eventually I figured out basically at that time the pharmaceutical, and this is 10, 15 years ago, the pharmaceutical industry was just starting to get into biopharmaceutical manufacturing. It was sort of an interesting subgenre of the space that hadn't yet blossomed. And people were very, very excited. MedImmune, which I don't think is a company anymore. I think they've been bought out and sold to somebody else. They had just won the Facility of the Year award for the next generation of pharmaceutical manufacturing plants. And people kept saying, if you can get the head of the factory for this MedImmune complex that won Factory of the Year to speak next year, I would come. And so again, I've only been making these phone calls a couple of months. I don't know what makes the factory special, but I just started calling this person 3 times a day. I had his phone number, I had his email address. And again, I'm just started this job. I'm on probation. I really actually do need to show my boss some progress. But eventually I got that person on the phone and he says, oh, I'm sorry. I know I've been ducking your call. I did one of these conferences once on a cruise ship and it was terrible. And I'd only been with the company a couple months, but we'd never done an event on a cruise ship. And there was a bad company in the space that sort of had a terrible reputation. I'm not going to name names on a podcast, but I said, by any chance, do you think I'm with such and such a company? He says, you're not with them? I said, no, I'm with World Trade Group. It doesn't exist anymore, but the company was called World Trade Group. He's like, I've been ducking your calls for a month. Sure, sign me up. I will speak at your conference. I'm really sorry about that. And again, that sort of human connection of start from a place of you don't know. He didn't know. He was just didn't want to speak at a conference from that other bad company before, and he thought I was them chasing him. When we finally connected, he came out. He was a keynote speaker. Everyone had a great time. The event hit 102% of its target, whereas the year before it had done 75% of its target. So I had done what I had been hired to do. And from there, I was well launched into the next company. So it was a problem. It was certainly data driven because they looked and said, we need someone who can actually build profitable events. And then I applied some tools that I'd learned in my job, and I made a product that the salespeople could sell.
Wow. It's impressive. And you said something really important. I remember when I made the transition from law to graphic design, it was really important. We must be conscious that what we do to ourselves is not exactly what the market wants. I always try to have this in mind while doing my creative endeavors. I do a kind of market research, publishing my work on social media, videos and pictures to see how people react. And if they like, I do more. If they don't like, I try to improve or even change the path. But yeah, we must get conscious about the market if we want to monetize our work. It's really important. I completely agree with you.
I can imagine experimentation in graphic design is constant because there's such a broad audience for it, but people like what they like. So I take your meaning exactly. Like you try something, and if it works, you keep doing it, but you always need to be experimenting as well because you don't know what else is going to hit.
Yeah. So let's talk about your podcast, Blueprint. As the host of the Blueprint podcast, you discuss issues relevant to business leaders. How do you select topics and ensure they resonate with your audience?
Well, most people who come onto the podcast have something very specific that they want to share, and we're recruiting them most of the time from our events. So we already sort of have a self-selecting group within a thing that we know people want to talk about. So I don't think it's going to be a surprise that I've already mentioned, like, everybody wants to talk about AI in the last year. So it's almost to the point that I'm consciously going out and finding people who don't want to talk about AI because I've had AI conversations about human resources. I've had AI conversations about finance. I've had AI conversations on manufacturing. I'm doing a AI conversation on cybersecurity in another couple of weeks. So like there's just a lot of AI in the space and there's a lot to talk about and that's wonderful. But you also want to make sure you're still talking about things like talent acquisition or change management or digital transformation or all these other big universal ideas. I would say one of the things that you always want to talk about is what are you excited about? Or what keeps you up at night, because those are things that are must know, they are interesting, they're engaging, and the person who's going to speak to you about it really cares. You don't want it to be them going through the motions. You want them to actually say, so I'll use sustainability as an example. We have launched a sustainability event, and these people care so deeply. And it is so interesting, again, that journalism background, asking how you got there. Most of these people have worked in sustainability spaces for years and years and years. And it's within the last 5 or 10 years that, corporations are saying this is actually important. It's not just nice to have, it's must have. It's not just good business, it's good for business, because there are regulatory requirements that are pushing them to do it. There is customer and stakeholder and shareholder engagement saying, what are you doing in this space? So they've gone looking for who the director and VP level people were who were responsible for green initiatives and carbon management and all this stuff, and they are now giving them the job titles and the resources and the authority to make real change. So when you get one of these people on a podcast, they're like, let me tell you about the carbon markets and why it used to be the Wild West, but people can trust it now. And this is how we're getting to that place. But I need to educate the public because, 5-10 years ago, there were some scams, and that's what gets on 60 Minutes. And now I need to walk that back. And I'm like, this is really exciting. So I don't think there have been too many interviews where I couldn't find what they're excited about. There are some interviews I've done where I'm like, this is going to be exciting to a very specific group of people. And that's why I try to do a wide range of things, because you want to have the conversation that matters to 20 or 30 executives working in an exciting space, because maybe 5 years from now, everybody is going to look at that and say, oh, that's great. I try to have evergreen conversations the same way you do. This podcast hopefully is still going to be relevant a year from now as it is today. But I don't tend to be very... I don't turn people down for an interview. I figure out what they want to talk about that is going to resonate with either a large audience or remain relevant over time.
Well, I completely agree with your idea. I don't talk about trends. This is a life issues podcast. I always say I lend my ear and hear many life stories, and it has been a great experience especially because many in many episodes I talked this story. I had a creative block for around 1 year and a half, and I still stayed 1 year without recording anything.
Oh, wow.
I was empty of ideas.
May I ask, was that during the COVID period? Because I experienced a similar sort of creative block during COVID.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
there you
After
go.
COVID.
Yeah.
Between 2020, 2021.
It was a tough time.
Yeah. I was completely empty of ideas. And, well, we were facing many insecurities. We didn't know what would come straight ahead. It was really hard. And now, actually, after reaching my mid-30s, I started looking at my past and thinking, oh, I love it, blogging and podcasting. Why did I stop? And then I returned. And, well, another interesting thing is many of my guests are men. And I was also very angry with men, especially because of some past experiences. And it has been a great journey. All these 2 seasons, these 2 shared seasons, because I'm meeting many people, and I can see we feel the same. We have worries, and well, men are not so cold as I thought. Well, I would now I want to ask you about your everyday life. What's your way of showing up for yourself every single day?
Showing up for myself. Now, could I get a little context for that? Like being in a positive mindset, taking care of myself.
Yeah.
What does showing up for myself mean?
Yeah, in a positive mindset, maybe.
Um, I like to find something every day that I think is worth repeating to my wife. I don't mean in a, take out the garbage or I took out the garbage sense. I mean like something I learned or discovered or I saw online or somebody told me. I want to have that when I come home and, how was your day? I always want to have something worth sharing. And, sometimes it's only interesting to me, but if I'm excited about it, that's still worth sharing because it's sharing my enthusiasms with her. And I think that has been a great focus of our relationship. Before I got married, before I met my wife, I think just the idea of lifelong learning is always really interesting. So I love to read. I love to engage through different social media tools with people who know things that I don't. And I like getting into something that I don't know a lot about. And I suppose that also has, going back to my work life, it has informed my journalism. It has informed my industry conference production. Being curious and open to new ideas and meeting new people is a great way to go through life. And having the confidence in yourself that you're going to be able to do that is very self-affirming, because whenever you find success at it, you can say, see, you could do this.
Oh, great. Well, I'm really an advocate of lifelong learning. I besides of podcasting, I have two online courses I'm developing, uh, and the field is sustainable drawing. You talked about sustainability, so it's the course is about how to get some home materials, things that would go to trash, would be garbage, and make it your art supply. I had a moment of money shortage, and I learned to create many art materials with from recycled materials, beer caps and plastic bottles. I also use many cardboard boxes, and I can make many artwork with these materials. I don't need to buy expensive art supplies to make great art stuff.
No, absolutely. And I embrace that. I remember as a kid, I was always given, the boxes and recycling and whatever to make toys out of. And I'm an uncle to three nephews, and I know my sister does the same, where it's a great way to, reduce, reuse, recycle. You have this stuff anyway. Why are you going out and buying expensive art supplies if you're just looking to be creative with what's around you? And you'll develop skills doing it. I'm sure you can speak to this. If you can make art out of something you've found, isn't that only going to further inform the art that you do have to go out and buy specific tools to make it? Well, if it works here, it'll work there. Or I can't quite get it refined enough here. So you know what you want to do when you go and buy a customized item. So, no, I think that's wonderful.
uh, Thanks. And I love the sensation of creating things from scratch. It's so exciting to. I'm making my own recycled paper, and I made so many tests. But it has been great to make my paper, because you start giving some value of what you do, even more value. I think it has been a great experience. So,
I also think there's something wonderful when you speak about creating paper. You can't buy that. A commercialized, consumerist society, I can go out and buy any kind of card stock I want, but I can't buy what you're making, and that in itself is an art form and makes what you make with that paper special.
oh, absolutely. I'm using to a graphic design project, so I think people will enjoy this idea. Because I don't know if you heard about it, but many soft drink industry like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and so on, they are creating, they are trying to see sustainable alternatives to tin cans. And when I read about it, I thought, wow, I need to bring it to my project, and that's what I'm doing. I'm developing some packaging with recycled materials. It has been great. uh, well, let's talk about balancing creativity and data. Uh, I know you are also an author of historical fiction. And how do you balance the creative aspects of writing the data driving nature of your role at executive platforms?
So I love this question because, whenever anyone finds out I wrote a book, they're like, well, where do you find time to do that? Because you also write in your working life. So one of the things that I try to do is have them as two separate spheres. I don't ever want to get um, tired or bored or frustrated out of the
Mhm.
writing I do for fun, even though I do writing for work, which I enjoy, but it is a different mental headspace. So one of the things I try to separate is where I do my writing. If I am working on a work project, I'm either in my office or I'm at a conference or I do have a home office, but like I do it between very specific hours. So when I'm writing for pleasure, if I'm at my home office, I do it late in the evening or very early in the morning. Or better yet, I pick up my laptop and I take it out to the balcony, or sometimes I go for a walk and I'll sit down in a sidewalk cafe or a pub or something. I try to get out of the place where I do my work writing. And I would never do work writing in any of those other places. Work writing belongs in one place and perhaps a very specific set of hours of the day. And what I do creatively for fun is outside of that space. And I think a change of environment and a change of the rhythm of your day, it trains your body to think in creative ways at that time and in that place that you wouldn't otherwise. So that's one of the ways I separate it. Another thing, I think just the subject matter is very different. I'm very lucky. The genre that really calls to me over and over again is telling stories set in the past. So if I, for a working living, talk to business executives about their future plans, there tends to be very little overlap of the two spaces. So I can compartmentalize. If I'm talking about sustainability solutions, that's probably not going to speak to something that happened hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Or if it does, that's just an interesting thing I can bring up at work. It never has to come back down the chain and resonate in my fiction. So that would be my answer to your question.
Oh, well, amazing. I try to do the same when I'm planning the podcast episodes, when I'm working on my graphic design projects. This is the space. It's my home office, and I love to work here. It's far from my bedroom, and well, it's really important to separate space. When I'm writing to my blog, I have a blog called Rice Mishap Cake Delight. It has nothing to do with cooking. I just like to talk about life issues. Um, and as you know, I'm Brazilian, and here we have a very special relationship with the kitchen space. We start and finish all the all the parties in the kitchen, and I wanted to bring this ambience to my personal blog. And when I'm writing to my blog, I can write in my bed, I can write in a coffee shop, I can even write while sitting at a beautiful place. I don't know. I have the idea and I get my phone, I take notes, I don't, and develop the idea one day. It's not like creating podcast episodes or working on graphic design or drawing professionally. It's completely different. So, yeah, I really resonate with the idea of separating spaces.
Sure, absolutely.
um, so, what are three unique skills that helped you become successful?
I don't know that they're unique, but I can think of pieces of advice that people have given me over the years that resonate with me, and I attribute some of my ability to do what I do to it.
Mhm.
The first one, I think, is that when you're having a conversation, you actually have to listen to the other person. You're not just waiting for your turn to speak. And if you give yourself maybe even just 2 or 3 seconds after they've said what they've said to really think about what they've said before you reply, that is going to be a better conversation. And
Mhm.
so much of the conversations that I've had in my working life have been about something I am not an expert at. And while you always want to project confidence and you always want to try to say the right thing, you're going to do a better job of that if you listen to what they said rather than just wait for your turn to make a point. And I'm not saying
Mhm.
I have always done this. I mean, I think that'd be saint-like behavior if no one has ever said, I've got a thing to contribute. But when I think about advice that guides me in how I speak to people, especially very busy people, very important people, very successful people, I am not them. But if they're giving me some of their time, take what they're giving me and think about it before I reply. And I also think people resonate with the idea of that person's a good listener, because it is rare in life to find someone who actually is taking in what you're saying and then replying to the points in what you've said rather than circling back to the thing that they already wanted to share. So that would be one point that I would say. It's not rare, but yes, if you don't just wait for your turn to speak, listen to what they said and even ponder it for a minute. I think that's a very strong conversationalist, and that has been a successful thing in my life. um Another thing that maybe, it's not rare, but it's very good advice, and again, I wish I took it more often. I'm bad at this in social media. I'm very good at this in all other forms of communication. Proofread what you write before you send it, and put yourself in the position of the reader. We judge other people by their actions and we judge ourselves by our intentions. But when you put something down in writing, that is what you're being judged by. So uh, take a breath. First of all, it's going to be better grammatically and more clear and concise if you've proofread it, but also think about your tone. Think about what you're maybe asking or trying to convey and how you're trying to convey it and how it's going to be received by the intended audience. And that works for both business correspondence and writing fiction. I mean, there should be a reader in mind, and you are trying to evoke something from that person. It might be you're trying to get them to say yes to something. It might be that you're trying to get them to remember a date. It might be that you're telling them a story and you want them to care about a character. Whatever it is, write creatively. Absolutely. Put down what you want to put down, but don't send it to anybody until you've read it with intention. And I think, again, social media, I'm bad at this because social media is quick, right? You're doing it with your thumbs on your phone and you hit send, and usually the typo's in the last word because you didn't read that last word. You hit enter immediately and you're like, pardon my typo. And it's always the last word. But in any long form communication, I would say the power of proofing is what separates effective communicators from people who can dash off something and I'm great at emails. I'm 2 sentences at a time. Well, even then, what makes you a powerful communicator at 2 sentences at a time is you read those 2 sentences. But for anything that is substantial, the power of proofing has made me a better communicator. So that's one I'd pass on. I guess maybe the third piece of advice that again has resonated with me is people want different things from you, and it's
Mhm.
okay to say no to that. I think there are things that you want to give, there are things that you're able to give, and knowing your limits, both what you can offer and can't offer and aren't able to offer, is going to make you a more genuine person in your engagements with
Mhm.
others. Um, you shouldn't say yes to things because you're afraid of disappointed people. That there's a reason you're saying no, and it's not to be mean. It might be, you don't have the bandwidth to do it. You might not have the capacity to help them. It might be that you just genuinely don't care enough to do a good job. I mean, that happens, right? There are people who say, "Hey, can you do me this favor?" And you're like, "Yeah, but am I really going to do a good job of that favor?" Like, what if you had an honest conversation about like, this is why I think I'd be a bad fit for whatever that was. Open, honest about your limits, why you're saying yes or no to a thing, can lead to better engagement down the road, even if it means, well, I didn't say yes to everything, which is great advice. I think putting yourselves in new, maybe perhaps in the beginning, uncomfortable situations, that's a positive. But people can do that, say yes to everything. They can take that too far. And the extreme piece of that I read somewhere, which I love, and I don't think it's ever been true of me, but I think it's true of other people, is don't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. I've never gone that far, but like the idea of self-sacrifice to please others just leads to a bad time. Like if you're just honestly communicating why you're saying yes or no to something, you are going to do things that you're more interested in, passionate about, effective about. And again, I think that works in both personal and professional situations. Just know your limits and don't be afraid to communicate why you are opting in and out of things. So that would be 3 pieces of advice that people have given me that I feel make me more effective in the day to day.
The last one, I'm learning the last one to say no. I um, I have many difficulties to say no, and I tried to be a people pleaser during my 20s. I'm not afraid to say, and I see why my life has stopped, because I I tried to please my family. I tried to please people I don't know. I tried to please society, and me. I was in the last place. And when I look back and reflect, yeah, I I I should say no to this situation.
And you're not doing it from a mean place. It's just saying, I'm not the right person to do this, or I'm not in the right place right now to do this. I
Yeah,
mean, explain why it's a no. And, you know, if the person is asking you is genuine in their ask, they should understand why you're being genuine in your no.
yeah, absolutely. We must know our limits. If we can't do it, we can't. Period. And about your second advice, I have a background in law, as you know, and I learned to how words can make it or break it.
Mhm.
So I always read once, twice, as many times as I wish before sending a comment, a post, because some people may get offended by what we said, and they can interpret it completely in a completely opposite way we tried to say. So yeah, I know words have a strong power to well to improve a situation or kill it. So I always try to proofread. It's a wise, very wise word. So when you were still a kid, what did you hope you would grow up to become?
Actually a writer. So I did achieve it. I don't think as a kid I understood writers don't make all that much money, but it was the dream. I have loved to read since, you know, I was a little kid, and I just remember thinking, you mean people make these stories up, and you know, I get to access. So the idea of making up your own story for other people was always very encouraging for me. I am the son of 2 accountants. My parents desperately wanted me to be an accountant. I don't have that, but to please them or to have alternatives out there. I do have an interest in architecture, which is not a thing you can do without a lot of math. And I was okay at computer science as a young person. So actually, I went to university for computer science for a semester, and I joined the
Well,
school paper. And the school paper then, you know, I come back at Thanksgiving and I say, you know, here's my first calculus midterm, and you know, here's what I've been doing for the school paper. Which do you think I'm more likely to make a living at? And that's actually how I moved into journalism from computer science. So as a kid, I had a few ideas, but writing was always in there, and I'm very pleased to find myself where I am today.
oh, amazing. Well, I love to write since I was a kid too, but I started writing diaries.
Oh, okay.
It's a, oh, to me, journaling is a pleasure. And when I started blogging, it was so natural that I can't imagine myself without writing anything. I love to write. I made an episode, I think, in the first or second seasons called Where to Yup. Oh, this is not a word. This is the sequence of the letters in keyboard. Where to Yup.
Mm,
Just to share my passion for writing.
I'll have to go back and listen to that episode.
uh, well, let's talk about more personal insights. You live in Toronto with your wife, Kelly,
Yep.
and your dog, Cora.
Cora's actually sleeping behind me right now.
Oh, oh, I'm a dog person, so I love dogs. How do you manage to balance your demanding professional life with personal time?
Well, I should say Kelly and I got married a year and a half ago, so it's I don't want
Oh,
to give
it's a
I don't
good
want to give
10.
relationship advice as if I've been married 20 years. I mean, there are certainly people I look up to, like, how do you do it? I may not be in a position to say that. I do want to say we met during or about 3 months before COVID happened. And so our relationship really accelerated when here in Canada, we had lockdowns, but if you lived by yourself, you were allowed to self isolate with one other person. And we lived within walking distance of each other, even though it's a big city. And so we took it in turn to have the other person over each day. So I would host one day, she would host the next day, and we would make a big dinner. We both enjoy cooking, just as you mentioned. The kitchen is a huge part of our lives, and we tried to impress one another. And it became a huge part of our relationship was cooking for the other, being a host to the other, caring what the other thought. And obviously the lockdowns have now ended, and we've moved forward with our relationship. But I
Yeah.
always try to think, whose turn is it to make dinner? What is she going to want? We plan a week ahead of time all the groceries we need, so we can only have to do one grocery trip a week. And having that person in your thoughts and wanting to make them happy goes a long way when you do make them unhappy, because nobody is perfect and there are points of conflict. And sometimes it doesn't even have to do anything with me or her. Something goes wrong in your working life and you come home and you're like, I had a bad day, and nothing gets you out of that mood for a little while, but you can always fall back on, this person cares about me. This person wants me to be happy, is working towards my happiness. And I think that is very self-reinforcing, and it builds and builds and builds over time. And I hope that is the direction our relationship goes for many years. And again, I also think she has helped me put a clearer dividing line between my work life and my private life. Because as a bachelor, if a project was behind schedule, I'd stay late and get it done. Or, if I was traveling for work, I would go a little early and stay a little late, and I'd be out of the country a little longer because, hey, I got a free flight to Denver. I've never been to Denver before. Let's explore Denver. And now I want to come home. I want to spend time with my wife. I want to spend time with my dog. And that's not to say I don't enjoy travel, but I also am a little more careful about where I say, okay, I'm done work for the day. And when I'm done work for the day, I don't go check an email. I don't sit down and try to get ahead on tomorrow's work. Done is done. She has some flexibility about, I need to, an extra hour because I got to send this email or whatever it is. Like, I can communicate that to her, but she expects me home at a certain time, either because I'm cooking dinner for her or because she's cooking dinner for me. And either way, the other one shouldn't be left waiting. And I think that is healthy. And I kind of wish I'd found that 10 years ago, because maybe would have had my 30s very differently if I'd been, a little less interested in work and a little more interested in what's going on in my home life. I had someone say this to me years ago, and it's always resonated with me. On your deathbed, you're never going to wish you spent more time at work, right? You're going to want to have those happy memories of things that you spent with your friends and your family and your loved ones. And I feel I have that now, and I feel really good about it. And, I guess maybe it's that newlywed thing where, people just want everybody to share in their joy, but this is working for us. And anyone who's listening to this and saying, oh, I could do a little more for my partner, I encourage you to do so. It doesn't cost you any more than, what is the Beatles line? The love we make is equal to the love. The love we make is equal to the love we take. Making something for someone else actually does you better than if you try to love yourself. That's a very self-serving way to go through life, and I don't think that accumulates over time. I think doing it for other people accumulates and grows over time.
Wonderful. Oh, I had a very different history. In my case, many people ask, why are you 35 and still single? Well, I have many many things that happened. First of all, when I turned 30, it was 2019 and 2020, and the COVID started. And I stayed 2 years, uh, well, in professional transition, making peace with myself and understanding more who I was. It was a great time for reflection. And right after starting my external life, my mother suffered an accident. I almost lost her, and I had to take care of her. I never take care of anyone, and I had to take care of my mother. Well, she lost some mental capacity. She had a concussion, and I had to be there for her. It wasn't a sacrifice for me. I did it with love and many great gratitude, because she was always a great mother, a very independent woman, even as a housewife. And well, I felt an obligation to help her in this tough moment. And I discovered I love my solitude. uh, and when I read about asex- asexuality, I discovered I'm demisexual. So I'm not afraid to say uh, I'm great the way I am. And well, I encourage people to find themselves, uh, regardless of the moment, if there is a pandemic or not, to find themselves. It's helped us to live a happier life.
Understanding yourself is the start of everything, right? If you know what makes you happy,
Yeah.
then you can work towards that.
Oh, absolutely. uh, well, let's talk about future trends and insights before opening the lightning round.
Okay.
Looking ahead, what trends do you see emerging in the industry events space? And how do you plan to leverage data to stay ahead of these trends?
Um, well, so my first thought is that my company actually recently got some outside investment and has been given capital to rapidly grow. So we are
Mhm.
actually in a growth phase. We're very excited. Our objective is to, put on 2 or 3 new series of events every year for the next 3 to 5 years. So 5 years from now, our company should be about 8 or 9 times bigger than it is today. So I appreciate the industry trends is the question, but our trend is we are about to move from being a very small, very successful, very niche player in this space.
Mhm.
Probably by the time I'm thinking of retiring, this will be one of the big events companies in the world. And
Mhm.
that's a very exciting thing to be. I joined the company as employee number 12 9 years ago, and there's every chance we're going to have hundreds of employees in a couple of different offices all over the world by the time I retire. So again, I don't want to name drop other companies, but there are 3 or 4 really big international players in the space, and I'm in the process of riding a company up into being the fifth major player in that space. And it wouldn't surprise me if we end up buying out one of the other ones as we grow. So that's a big trend, and what we're doing about it is just the same thing we've always done. Where we're looking at the data. We're looking at where the gaps are in the market for events that we can run our way genuinely. I think there are some bad actors in the place who overpromise and underdeliver people, because so much of the thing is a promise. So we're putting together this event. You're going to find value in it. This is happening and this is happening. So and so is going to be there. So and so, and then you get on site and it's not quite what you were promised, but you say, all conferences, they do their best, and then this is what you get. We have tried to always, I won't say under promise, but we deliver on our promises. We try to exceed expectations. I know the owners of my company always use the term surprise and delight, right? If you show up on site and it's more impressive than you thought it was, well, then that's the person who's going to come back. And not only are they going to come back, but as that person goes through their own career, they're going to remember Executive Platforms puts on a great conference. Hey, I should tell, now I'm a C-suite executive. So I'm a chief manufacturing officer. I go to the manufacturing show. I should talk to the chief supply chain officer. I should talk to the chief information officer, the chief sustainability officer, the chief quality officer. Hey, Executive Platform shows are worth doing. And every time we get that organic connection and grow our network, we don't have to worry about competitors because nobody actually has that kind of word of mouth going. Going back to what we were talking about COVID, we launched our sustainability event, brand new. We'd never done one before, virtually during COVID. We just emailed out to our existing network. We said, you keep saying we need to do a sustainability show at a very senior level. Here is the link that we're going to do virtually. Could you forward this on to whoever in your company is in charge of the sustainability event? We had more than 200 senior executives from North America's Fortune 500 all coming in on a Zoom call. They'd never heard of us before. We didn't hire new people. We didn't run an advertising campaign. We didn't need to do anything other than let people know who were already happy with us that we're doing this thing virtually. And then we've now run it twice in person since. So we successfully launched during COVID at a time where every other events company in the world was shuttering things, refunding people their money, or not refunding people their money. There's a couple of companies that are now going through lawsuits where they took someone's money in 2019 and they never ran the event. And here it is 3 and 4 years later, and it's going to the courts because that money was all spent years ago. It can't be refunded. It's gone, but the event never happened. There are some people who are very unhappy about that. We never had that problem. We ran every event that we had planned. Some of them we had to run virtually, or we waited until the next physical event, and then whoever was doing business with us before came to that one, right? Sometimes we pushed it forward, or sometimes we did it virtually, but whatever it was. And if people said, hey, this isn't what we purchased, we did give them their money back. And I think that helped our brand continue to shine on the far side of the pandemic. And again, I think that's where that outside investment came in and said, you're the company we want to, see rise to prominence. So that's a big trend. I've actually forgotten if there was a third part to your question, but I think the first two, I hope, answered it well.
It's the yeah, it was the future. What you want to just sorry, and goals. I always ask this to all my guests because the future is now, and many things can happen on the way. We know how 2020 was a huge change in our life plans. But yeah, sometimes it becomes a positive change. In my case, it was also positive. I can't deny. Without the studies in philosophy, I couldn't return blogging and podcasting with so amazing guests. Okay, let's go to our lightning round. It's the last round of questions. I will ask you some quick questions, but the answers, they don't need to be quick.
Okay.
The first one. What's your favorite historical period to write about?
So I've written different things. So the book that is doing the best, and that when people say, "Oh, you've written books, what should I look up?" I always say the Inca, which being in South America, there's not a lot of historical fiction in English about South America. And I went looking for some because I wanted to learn more about it. And I always find it's more interesting to learn history through historical fiction, which is not to say I don't read nonfiction history. Obviously I do, but it's accessible. It's you're being educated while you're being entertained. And the most popular book about the Inca I could find was a French translation of a book written, 50 years ago, and the protagonist was a blue-eyed woman. And I'm like, this is not hard enough historical fiction for me. I need something more. And so I did read the history of the Inca, and I read it for 5 or 6 years. And as I was doing the nonfiction work, it occurred to me I'm actually researching a novel. And so the book is called Inca. If you put Geoff Micks or Inca into Amazon, that is my bestseller. I think it's got 370 or 380 reviews. I get emails all the time from people who either went on holiday to Peru and they didn't want to take a textbook with them, so they took this novel and they're like, "Oh, it was great. I saw everything on my trip," but it wasn't a travel guide. It was a story. I've also gotten emails from people in South America. There's a lovely woman in Bolivia who married an American, and she gave him this book so that he would know a little bit about her country and her culture. And she said this was absolutely wonderful for our relationship, that he could read it in English rather than me have to explain everything to him, because I'm not a history nerd, but you've done the work here. And to get that kind of validation from a woman from Bolivia, I've also gotten it from some archaeologists who work in the space, some historians who work in the space. It is absolutely wonderful to hear that kind of feedback from people who do live and breathe that stuff. It's their culture, but I found it fascinating, and so I wanted to tell that story. Now, I appreciate when you say that in a podcast, people who aren't interested in the Inca are kind of like, I don't know if that's really for me. I will say I went to university, journalism, but I did a classical studies minor. I've always been interested in the Mediterranean world. So that's thousands of years of history, but probably the one that people are going to resonate, Roman history. I can do all kinds of stuff in that space. And I recently did a trilogy, and the books are called Beginning, Middle, and End. And the premise of that, sort of the framing device, is it's a person who has been alive since the last ice age. In 2015, he buys a tape recorder, and over the course of 3 days, he dictates his life story as fast as he can while he waits for a visitor who he's pretty sure is finally going to be the death of him. So there's huge parts of this book that happen with Phoenicians and Carthaginians and people who are not Roman complaining about the Romans, because there's so much historical fiction told from the Roman point of view. But of course, they pushed around so many people as they rose and fell from prominence. Wouldn't it be interesting to tell the story of the outsiders who, not to say oppressed, but were pushed back and didn't get to achieve what they wanted to achieve as the Roman Republic and Roman Empire expanded? And then again, if this person is living throughout history, he also saw the collapse and what came after. So there was a really interesting way for me to indulge in periods of history that I find really interesting. I was never going to write a whole book about them, but I could have a chapter, because every chapter is a short story with the through piece of this narrator who has been alive for all of recorded and some prehistory, all of time. So yes, I would say if people are saying, okay, well, he writes historical fiction, what does he do? I do all kinds of stuff. But, if you're interested in Roman history, I've done some Roman history. If you're interested in the Inca, my goodness, I did a great book on the Inca. I did a book on the Zulu. That one I'm a little less proud of, just because it was a first. I think every author makes mistakes in their first novel that if they could go back and start with a blank piece of paper, it would be a different book. I was, 17 to 20 when I was writing that. How good a storyteller are you at 17 to 20 versus, a 35 or a 40-year-old? But it has found an audience in the UK. Of course, the British people are well versed in the Zulu, so it's something that they're interested in. But it's a little bit more of a boys' adventure story than some of the, like Inca has a good cast of female characters, has life stories about people having families, and so it's not just. I don't want to write stories about war. I don't want to write stories that are things that are only for men to be interested in. So my current writing project is actually something I sat down with my wife. Sorry, this is meant to be a lightning round, and I've become a very talkative person, but my wife doesn't read historical fiction, and she's never read my books, and I actually appreciate that. I don't want her to humor me. I want her to genuinely enjoy a book and then tell me what she liked about it. And I sat down and I said, I'm going to dedicate this next book to you, which means I want it to be something you like. Tell me about the stories you like. And she says, I like stories where women overcome adversity. I like family stories. I like gossip. I don't think gossip is a bad thing. It's exciting stories to share. I like the scandals that matter to small groups of people rather than big things. She doesn't want a conflict. She doesn't want a rise and falls of empires or whatever it is. She wants an intimate family story. And I said, I can do that, but I want to do it set in history, because I love living in the past and then educating people in the future about what excites me about it. And so I have been doing some research for a while on a period of time that, people have heard of it, but they don't really know anything about it. The 5th century in Europe, the western half of the Roman Empire is coming down. The eastern half of the empire is still doing really well. Christianity is the state religion, but they're still fighting over what is Christianity. There were literally councils where they got together and said, this is Christianity and this isn't. And anybody who didn't, they got cast out. So that's the big picture. That's the large story. And then the small, intimate family story. It's a mother and son. They're both, she's a widow, he's a widower. And she has a, upsetting incident in Rome. And she says, let's go on a religious pilgrimage. There is a man in the Syrian desert. This is a real guy. His name was Simeon Stylite. He lived on a pillar 50 feet high. On top of that pillar for 37 years. People put food up to him in buckets, and they took his waste away in hopefully different buckets. And they go on this pilgrimage to meet a living saint. And over the course of this journey across the ancient world, they meet all kinds of interesting people who have all kinds of interesting ideas and conversations and stories. And they have some adventures. But when they get there, they talk to a living saint and their lives change for the better. They become happier. They find a new life. And then you have to ask yourself, what happens when the living saint dies? Because their whole life is going to change if they've built their life around this man. What happens when he's gone? And so the framing device of that story is the man is going to be in prison, and he's writing what happened so that hopefully someone will get him out of prison, because he and his mother get arrested in connection with the death of a living saint. So that's the framing device, and the whole story is leading up to his arrest. And I'm having so much fun writing it, and it is not a war story. There's no plague, there's no violence. It is a mother and son looking for a better life and basically going on a road trip across a part of the world people know about in a time of history that they don't. So I have an opportunity to sort of get people educated and excited and entertained about something that they probably think is pretty boring, but it's going to resonate with them, because when they're debating, what is Christianity? Well, they're making up the rules right now. So you can even agree, I think this, I don't think that. And you don't have to believe in any of it, but philosophically, what are some of the big questions being asked? Where do you fall on that divide? Well, let's have a conversation about it in an entertaining way. And there's funny bits, there's serious bits. It's a lovely story. So I'm about half, 2/3 of the way done writing it, but I'm very excited to finish it so I can show it to my wife.
Oh, wonderful. Well, when you said about books involving family stories, I'm developing a graphic novel called The Dual Fighter Arena, and it has a female protagonist.
Okay.
On the outside, she's a fighter. On the inside, she's a traditional wife. And I want to show I want to show the abusive relationships, and I'm trying to show this story based on things I read and people I know. That's how I develop. I always observe. I'm an observer, a long time observer, and my stories, they start from things I lived in the past, or I saw someone living. There is another story I wrote, another graphic novel called The Celebrity I Don't Know, when TikTokers were beginning. And I was waiting, wearing my time to go to Pilates class, and this TikToker just stole my place, and I wrote about it.
I think graphic novels are such an interesting medium, especially for a graphic designer, because you can tell the story the way you want to tell it. I'm always intrigued by people who can both write and make the art that illustrates the story that they want to tell. I don't have that gift, but how wonderful, first of all, that you do. And you've already done one book and you're doing another. I wish you great success with it.
Oh, thanks. So the next question is all about it. What's a book that has profoundly influenced you?
Oh, it's tough to pick one.
Okay.
Why don't we?
If you asked me this question,
sure, please.
I would answer the same.
Oh, sorry. I thought you had an answer for me, and I was going to listen to you and try to come up with an answer of my own. Why don't we say the writings of James Clavell? So I don't know if Shogun was on television down in Brazil. It's a limited series that just finished wrapping up. It was very popular here in North America, and I think it's going to win a bunch of Emmys. There was also a miniseries called Shogun in 1980 that, won a whole bunch of prizes. And before that, there was a book in 1975 by James Clavell. Historical fiction has grown up a little since then. It's a little dated. It's a little Eurocentric in its view, especially when you're talking about a story set in Japan. But James Clavell's writings all revolve around Europeans coming to Asia in one way or the other, and the conflict between those worlds. And some of them are historical fiction, some of them are contemporary fiction. He wrote his first novel, King Rat. It's actually fictionalized autobiography. He himself was captured by the Japanese during the Second World War, and he was kept in a prisoner of war camp. And I always marvel that he came out of that experience without hating Japanese people. He was very interested in this different people, different culture. But years later, he and his wife had moved from the UK to Hollywood. He was trying to make it as a movie writer, script writer, and he kept waking up with night terrors. And his wife said, "Well, why don't you write it down? Write down what happened." And he said, "I couldn't tell you what happened. Some of those people are still alive, and they would be horrified if I told their story. Some of those people are dead, and I would be horrified to betray their memory, because everybody was just doing what they could to survive in a prison camp that was run by people who didn't believe in the Geneva Convention. They came out of there as walking skeletons." And she says, "Well, write it down, but never say which bits are true and which bits are false." And so the book was called King Rat. It was turned into a movie. On the strength of that book, he then moved to Hong Kong for a couple of years and wrote a couple of books about Hong Kong. He wrote Shogun about Japan. All of his things are where the West has made contact with the East, but he has characters on both sides of the line who don't like each other, who don't understand each other, who disagree with each other, and perhaps one or two characters who straddle the line between those two worlds and are genuinely not liked by either side for being the person who bridges that divide. Now, it is an old white British man writing this stuff, so some of it is not as, modern in its thinking as it could be, but he was a progressive innovator for his time. And I have read those books since I was a little kid, and I always get something different from them, because he does, first of all, tell a wonderful story. Second of all, I won't say he gets all the history right. He's very comfortable sort of rounding off rough edges for the sake of a story, but he gets the cultures right. He gets why, if you embarrass someone in this culture, they react this way. If you embarrass someone in that culture, they react that way. He's also very good, especially again for an old white British man, with gender divides. When he writes a female character, it is a believable female character. You don't get the sense that there's a man behind the scenes pulling a puppet strings. The woman would say this. No, it's a human being in that world, in that space, who wants things, who is trying to achieve things, who, when they come up against an obstacle, these are some of the ways they can try to get around that obstacle. It's very good storytelling, and every character in all of these books wants something real that makes sense, that if I were in that position, I would want that too. And a lot of them don't get it. And then you also see how they deal with the frustration of not getting what they want. He's past now, an incredibly talented writer. And I remember one of the reasons I picked historical fiction over other genres is I wonder if I could ever write a James Clavell novel. Now, I haven't. I like to think Zulu is sort of my early Wilbur Smith, and I like to think Inca. So many people in the Amazon reviews have said, "Oh, this is just like Gary Jennings' Aztec," which I view as a huge compliment. And I won't say what the trilogy is supposed to be. Originally, my thought was it was going to be sort of a Kurt Vonnegut-esque novel, but then it turned into a trilogy, and he didn't do trilogies. But the idea of trying to write like another writer or meet some of their bullet points really inspires me. I'm not a good enough writer to be a James Clavell yet. I hope I am before I die. It would be lovely to write a Clavell-esque sort of meeting of two worlds adventure story that is big enough to one day be turned into a miniseries. Wouldn't that be lovely? But I'm not saying I'll get there, but it is an ambition of mine. So, name a writer or an author who inspires you. I could do this with 20 other writers of historical fiction. I keep looking over my shoulder. That's all of James Clavell in hardcover. And then next to it are my books. So I guess I should probably highlight the person who I put on the shelf next to me as my inspiration.
Oh, wonderful. Well, in my case, I love classic literature. My favorite author is Jules Verne.
Oh,
My
wonderful choice.
Around the World is in 80 Days is my all-time favorite book. I read this book, I think, many times, and I love this story.
I love that one. I love 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Journey to the Center of the
Oh,
Earth. I mean,
it's
he's done so
great.
many wonderful stories.
Yeah, no, he's great. I love to read Verne's stories, and inspires me to keep the curiosity flame about world cultures alive.
I can also see how that would be such an inspiration for a graphic artist and a graphic novelist, because so many of his stories lend themselves so well to that imagined what is the image that goes with it. He's a very visual storyteller.
Yeah. I agree with you. And the book I have, it was my great grandfather's, and it is a graphic piece, and it has the story written and the graphic piece on the other page. Oh, it's wonderful. I love this edition. The book is still brown, but the story is the same.
Oh, I love old books. I mean, I feel, and I'm not a spiritual person, but I think an old book has a soul. I think of all the people who have ever walked by it. I think of all the people who have ever picked it up and read it. What rooms has that book sat in for its life, and what has it passively seen? So old books,
Great.
I always feel a little pain when someone's like, "Oh, throw away that old book. You're never going to read it." I'm like, but I'm just one person in this book story. Who knows what it comes to next? I donate books. I hope they find a home somewhere.
Oh, they have life. I
Sure.
agree. uh, what's your go-to productivity tool?
My go-to productivity tool.
Yeah.
Um, hmm. So I have terrible handwriting, but I do like to just sit down with a pen and paper and like dash off notes. But I also find there's a tipping point in my productivity when I start thinking, oh, I shouldn't be writing this down. I should be typing it. Then I really have something, because it's not just, noodling around or scratch it. If I'm planning on keeping it, I should type it, because, what goes down in handwriting is going to have to be typed up eventually anyway. So I'm duplicating work. So a productivity tool for me is, when do I write something down, in a note, and then when do I say I have to stop this? I have to type it. So it's very good at focusing when you're actually going to be productive. So that's my top of mind answer. I could probably come up with something else, but that's where my mind immediately went to, because again, I'm looking at a pile of notepads just off screen here that are full of things that they're half written, and then I started typing them.
Oh, I must show a behind the scenes
There you
tool.
go.
I
There you
have
go.
post-its and a notebook with the notes from my guests. So I love to write. I think I memorize better while writing things. Well, I have tried many applications, many productivity applications, like Remember the Milk and To-Doist, many, and none of them worked for me. The best one is paper.
Yeah.
Oh, and the second to last question from the lightning round: describe your perfect weekend.
Oh. Well, so I forgive me. We got Cora in November, so my dog isn't going to be part of my perfect weekend yet. We're only just coming into summer here in Canada. Probably I should
Oh,
say
she
take the
is
dog
still
for
a
a walk.
baby.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day outside, but like, I should say I take the dog for a walk. But when I think beautiful weekend, I'm probably going to wake up. I'm going to make a really nice breakfast for my wife and I. We probably have a couple of little chores to do during the day, but at some point we're going to come home. I'm going to sit out on the balcony and read a book. She's going to do something that she wants to do, and we'll sort of come back together later in the day, maybe split a bottle of wine and talk about what we're going to make for supper, because on weekends we cook together. We're not, it's my turn to cook, it's your turn to cook.
Oh.
We collaborate on the weekends. So that tends to be a little bit of a bigger occasion. It tends to be something that actually takes some time to make. And she is half Italian and like is very close to those roots. So a lot of those things are, it takes all day to make, but then it's going to taste amazing. So that to me is a big thing. I do really enjoy, obviously, who doesn't, their friends and family. So I do always try to have something going on either in an evening or a daytime activity where, as one example, I'm very good at trivia. So I will go to trivia nights with coworkers or friends or just people that I know, and we tend to do very well, which makes it a more enjoyable thing. But you're sitting around a table, you have some beers, you're telling stories to each other between rounds, and then you have an activity that you play together. I really love to do that. Um, I do enjoy writing fiction, so again, that's a weekend activity for me. And I also try to go somewhere. So have a get out of the house and do a road trip to somewhere, or go downtown and see something that's happening. Get out of the house and come back with a new experience. So I appreciate, again, probably walking the dog should have been on that list. She hasn't quite made the cut yet, but when I visualize my perfect day, it's a lot of sort of like going somewhere and coming back with a story, or going out onto my balcony and coming back ready to do some cooking. I really enjoy both the solitary stuff and then also doing stuff with my wife and then doing stuff with other people.
Yeah, great. Oh, my best place ever in the universe is the coffee shop. I love to travel and visit a coffee shop in the place I'm traveling. It's a ritual, and it's so good. I love to stay there with a cup of coffee, with my sketchbook, and sketch something.
I used to know a man who I don't do this so much since I got married because my wife doesn't enjoy karaoke. But as a young man, I did a lot of karaoke in Toronto, and there was this older gentleman who would come out to karaoke with his sketchbook, and in between him doing his songs, he'd be at the table, and he always sketched from a photo of birds or animals, and he was absolutely incredible at it. And after I'd known him for a couple of years, I realized he was actually selling these things. So he would get people interested in his art in a big crowded pub where everybody is just drinking and having a good time, and then they look over like, that's really good. He says, oh yeah, thanks. And by the second or third time they're doing it, they're like, how do I buy this? And I actually think it's how he ran his graphic design business in a pre-social media age. He took his sketchbook to the pub. And one of my regrets is that when I was 22, 23, I didn't have the disposable income to buy. His name was Douglas Hayes. He's no longer with us. But from time to time, I actually do put it into Google, Douglas Hayes sketch. And if I ever find one online, I'm going to buy it because I knew the man well. I sang a lot of songs with him at karaoke, and I never bought his art. And I would love to get my hands on a copy of that. I hope one day that happens. But so when you said take a sketchbook to a coffee shop, I'm like, I've seen that. I've seen, not quite a coffee shop, but I have seen that. Yeah.
I love to sing karaoke too. Actually, I call myself the karaoke queen because now I stopped for a while because the tablet I use it to sing broke, but I love to stay there and sing with people from around the world. One of my favorite singing partners was a Korean man, Jung Mi. We used it to sing opera arias
Oh, wow.
because I studied classical music and opera in my singing class. So it was so good.
Absolutely.
And the last question from this round. What's one piece of advice you'd give to your younger self?
This is going to sound odd because I've said a lot about like knowing yourself and like knowing when to say yes and when to say no. I would tell my younger self to have more fun. I think, as a young man, I was in a hurry to grow up, and I made a lot of decisions based on like, well, is this going to work in the long term or isn't it? And there is that joke, no one on their deathbed says they wish they spent more time in the office. I could have had more fun in my 20s. I could have said yes to more things. I could have gone outside of my comfort zone more often. I could have had adventures that nothing was going to come of them, but that also means there's no consequences if they had gone awry, So it's something that I learned in my late 20s and my 30s to sort of put myself out there and do things not because they were going to amount to something, but because I was going to enjoy them. And I think I probably could have figured that out earlier. I was a very serious young man in a lot of ways. I remember going back to this karaoke thing, my best friend and I, when we were 18, we would go to the pub and a bartender said, he's a bad influence on you, but he's the bad influence you need. You're too straight and narrow. And I had a couple of other people say basically the exact same thing to me over the years, including my mother. When she finally met him, she's like, he's a bad influence on you, but you needed one of those. You were just a little bit too good or boring, maybe might be the way to say. And so if I had advice for my younger self, it would be get into more trouble, have more fun. The things that are going to work out will work out eventually. You don't need to be working so hard on it right then.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great piece of advice. In my case, I would ask more times to say no and don't listen to what they say.
So maybe we needed
Well,
to meet in the middle on that one.
yeah. One day, and one book I read during the lockdown time that helped me say no was the Mark Manson bestseller, The Subtle Art of Not Giving.
Oh, yes.
This book helped me for real. And then I started looking at my life and thinking, why should I care with my distant relative, with the aunt, with the uncle, with people I just see once and twice a year, or I just see once or twice a lifetime? I don't know. So I started giving many F's to these people and living my life, creating my reality. It helped me a lot.
You're not the first person who's told me that book has really helped them make some choices that they had been putting off making. So yes, I'm delighted to hear it's resonated with you as well.
Oh, absolutely. Well, before we go to our last question, let me just do a little recap. Well, we talked a lot about writing and reading and podcasting, and you have an extensive background in planning and running industry events. And lastly, we talked about some life issues. And the motto of this podcast is inspire and engage. And I think we are reaching this goal in this episode. For fellow podcasters and writers, we love writing and reading. And no one should be afraid of loving this. Just try and jump into this road. You will never leave it.
I would echo that, and I would say for writers, the most important thing you can do is actually put something down on paper or onto a screen or whatever. You can always polish it, but you can never improve something you haven't actually made yet. So actually having some work to work on is the best advice that any writer can give any other writer. And whenever anybody's asking for like, oh, productivity tips or whatever, I'm like, but are you actually writing? Because if you are, then you're already further ahead than a lot of other people who would like to be writing. And for podcasting, I hesitate to build on what you've said because you've been doing this a lot longer than I have. But I think one of the things that holds people back from podcasting is a fear of failure. And I would say there isn't really a way to fail at this because podcasting is about putting content out into the world and it will find its audience. That audience may not be a big audience. That audience may not be something that monetizes. If your idea is to monetize, I guess there's a way to fail to make money. But if the idea is having a conversation with an interesting person that some other interesting person might want to listen to, if you have a podcast, if you record an episode, you are doing the thing. So you haven't failed. And again, if you're having evergreen conversations like the one Leia has arranged here, this will still be relevant if someone comes across it a year from now or 5 years from now. So you don't know when things are going to pick up speed and find an audience. You need to build the thing for the audience to find. And that is success in its own right.
Oh, amazing. Now let's go to the last question Oh, this conversation has been so good to me. I don't know if you like it too.
I have, absolutely. Thank you so much again for having me on
Oh,
the show.
great. For those looking to enter the industry events field or become content and research leaders, what advice would you offer, particularly regarding the importance of understanding and using metrics?
So I will say my industry space is a niche one. It's actually one of those
Uh-huh.
things I think most people don't think of when they think, oh, I'm going to go to school for something. There's no going to school for what I
Mm-hmm.
do. But most people in their life at some point go to a conference. So the idea of, okay, well, who organized this conference? The first piece of advice I would give is what is the thing that you want to do in the conference space? And about 90% of the people who are working in this space are either event planners, right? They've gone to school for event planning and they're doing the back end logistics of things, or they're business development and salespeople who actually persuade people this conference is worth their time. I occupy the small niche in between that does neither. So my advice for people who want to do what I do is, are you making content? Are you really interested in having conversations? Are you
Mm-hmm.
intimidated talking to strangers? If you're not, well, this is a good space for you. If you're in a creative pursuit that involves engaging with the public, but also writing things that are going to then matter to subject matter experts, right? It's not just enough to, have conversations. You then need to speak to your audience in a language that they understand. If you can do all that, by all means, go looking for who organized the last conference you liked, because there are events companies behind these events. Go down to the bottom of the website and it says, who produced it. Okay, what is their contact information? What other conferences do they build? Send an email to these people. I know there's that old joke where like the baby boomer generation says, you walk up there and you hand in your resume and you'll get a job. And that's not how the world works anymore. But realistically, there are not a ton of conference producers in the world. And almost every conference producer in the world started off doing something very, very different and brought themselves to the attention of a conference production company and says, I think I would be good at this. Journalism is a great path to this. People who regularly participate in conferences and say, oh, could I work on the other side of the fence? They're a great way to get into it. Or just being a creative person with a portfolio of work that says, if you give me the opportunity to talk to subject matter experts, write an agenda, train a sales staff, and then go on site and network with these people, I would be good at that. I think lawyer would be an excellent space, although I have to think lawyer is probably usually more lucrative than conference production. But there's good careers in both spaces to be sure. The advice I have is basically you have to want to do it and then seek out the company that does it. Or when you're on the job market anyway, keep an eye out for a industry conference company, because when they're advertising, it may not look like any of the other openings. And you'll say, well, I've just applied for 5 jobs like X. Why would I apply for this totally different thing? Well, there's not a lot of us out there. So it is a space that you have to either keep an eye out for when you're on the job hunt or actively go in and pitch to get into. But once you're into it, it's a very warm and inviting space. I have worked for 4 or 5 different events companies in my career so far. Hopefully, I'm where I am now until retirement, because as I mentioned, our company is doing very well and is about to do even better. But
Mm-hmm.
every head of a conference production company in North America and some of the ones in Europe know who I am. If for any reason I was out of work, I have other opportunities out there. So once you're in this space, you can rattle around in it for the rest of your career if you like the work. And I find most people, when they get into the space, do like the work. So I encourage everybody who has heard this episode and said, I could do that, give it a try. And also, I will say, if you're entrepreneurial, which I'm not, you could start your own events company. It is not an incredible mountain to climb. It's just you need to have both the conference production side and the sales side and the operations side. If you can do those 3 by yourself, you can run a conference, and a conference will generate enough revenue for you to build a company around and do multiple conferences. That's how every events company in the space ever got started, ever. So, I'm not entrepreneurial, but I'm very happy to work for some very great entrepreneurs. I sought them out. Well, I mean, we all work together in another company that no longer exists, but in the beginning, I sought out a conference production company because I worked in newspapers and I needed a better job. And now that I'm in this space, it's networking and proving that you're able to contribute a product that can be sold. And yeah, that would be my advice.
Yeah, networking is key nowadays. I must say. I had to find alternatives ways of to networking because, like I told you, I'm really hard to break the ice in person. So I always look at for alternative ways to network with other people. Uh, and I think I'm finding this with this podcast and my artwork. I feel more confident to break the ice with people while talking about it. And lastly, I attended to more than 200 conferences
Oh,
in
wow.
my lawyer life. So I know there is a huge organization behind each conference. Universities and many other hotels and many other places.
Sure.
Well, thank you, Geoff, for coming to this podcast.
Absolutely.
I'm
Thank you so much for having me.
and I want to ask you a bonus question. DKLA's doors are always open to you. Would you come back one day if you could?
Absolutely. I would be delighted to do so. So I know this year's or this episode's theme was data. If you give me the theme ahead of time, I can even come up with something to pitch you that we can talk about so that we don't have to overlap what we've done before. I would be happy to do a little content generation for you. You let me know.
Okay. Oh, I'm so glad to have you back if you come. And of course, the episodes are never the same. I always try to do something different. Uh, if even if it's just the same the same guest.
Right.
So I wish you the best with your endeavors. And I wish you the best with your family, with your wife and your baby dog.
All the best to you as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Role of numbers and metrics in his work, his experience hosting the Blueprint podcast, and his passion for historical fiction writing. Thank you for tuning in to DKLA. We hope you enjoyed today's episode with Geoff Micks. Remember, understanding and leveraging numbers can significantly enhance both professional success and personal growth. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review DKLA. Share it with your friends on social media and stay tuned for more inspiring stories. You can find more about Geoff and his work at the links below. Thank you for listening. See you next time. In other words, in the citoyen du monde. Since 2015, this is me on my other side of life.
Determined by the unresidence of living.